Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our, I would say, the final parallel session of the day. I want to say that we try to save the best for last, or should I say the most important for last. So I will just give an overview of this section. So I want to say that welcome to this final yet most vital parallel session of the day on advancing locally led anticipatory and early actions in pastoralists and dryland communities. In my work, I have always actually put locally led at the center of what I do, but also currently being with the START network, locally led is at the center of how we support communities. However, at the beginning of this year, I actually, I realized that I just realized how I have not fully appreciated the importance of locally led. When we experience funding cuts, suddenly, I think it became apparent the importance of locally led. Because any system that is not really driven by the local community, that is not owned by the community, it should. To this day, we are still baffled by the different communities, be they displaced pastoralist communities, what actually is happening there when funding goes down. So in this last parallel session of the day, we are not just talking about responding to pastoralist and dryland communities, but we are looking at how to do it early and in anticipation, how to ensure that it is timely, how to make sure that communities are steps ahead of the challenges that they face, how to make sure that we are acting before the potential impacts fully actually unfold. We all know that by so doing, we can mitigate potential impacts on lives and livelihoods, and also the needs of pastoralists and dryland communities. Evidence tells us how this is more dignified, more timely, and more cost-effective. In a region where climate shocks and food insecurity are hitting harder and faster, especially in the pastoralist and dryland communities, the call for locally led, proactive action and not reactive action has never been more urgent. What will it take to ensure that early warning and anticipatory action in drylands communities is truly locally led and builds lasting resilience? Ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon we have assembled a team of experts who have a body of work that is really looking at what could help us to better shape locally led action, what could help us to shape locally led anticipatory and early action, which is timely to the community. So we have a team of 4 speakers who, for the first 10 minutes, for the first about 30 to 40 minutes, will share their body of work that they've been doing around the subject of anticipatory and early actions, but also it being locally led. So we will be hearing 4 consecutive speakers. You will also then get time to have discussions at the end and get feedback from them. So I would like to introduce, their first speaker, who is from the University of Edinburgh, Jameel Observatory. And this is George Sitati. He is going to be sharing on advancing use of indigenous early warning knowledge. I'll invite you to the podium. Thank you. Yes. Okay, over to you, George.
Thank you, Nelly. As you have heard, I really find befitting to introduce myself as early in the morning I had a conversation with one of my friends and she refers to me as the intestine guy. From where I come from, when someone refers to you as an intestine guy, it harbors different connotation. I will go deeper into that. So my name is George Sitati, and I am a PhD student at the University of Edinburgh. And today I'll be sharing what I've been doing for the past 3 years, which is looking at how pastoralists predict the onset of climate-induced humanitarian crises and measuring droughts. I will start by posing a question. How many of you believes in their weather apps by the show of hands? When it says it's going to rain, anywhere, just let's say Nairobi, right now we receive a forecast that it's going to rain tomorrow. How many of you believe that? How many of you will believe that when an elder say that the God's intestine suggests it's going to rain tomorrow? How many of you will believe that? How many of you would believe that by merging the two, the chances of raining is high and would believe that information? That is interesting because I am the antithesis of the last thing. Anyway, I will start by providing some of the evidences on how pastoralists predict. And we have seen that a majority of us believe that merging of the two knowledge systems is very imperative. But from my research, it suggests that we need to move past the science-indigenous dichotomy. Pastoralists themselves, they draw from diverse knowledge system, from scientific, from indigenous. Knowledge is not binary. They don't have a binary way of looking at knowledge. There's no scientific, there's no indigenous. And they have this idea of multiple knowledge rather than integration. The way they combine knowledge is not technical sense, but conditional and situational. And the next slide, I just want to show you some of the local indicators and typologies that pastoralists use to predict. And you can see the various indicators. We have meteorological indicators, we have technological indicators such as radios and weather information, biological indicators, which has the highest mentions. We can tie that, attribute that to because they are pastoralists. But what I'd love for you to pick from these is the fact that we have different and varied indicators that pastoralists use to predict. And if you can see from these indicators are different and the level of measuring also different. How does they come to a decision? Allow me to introduce you to the 4 pathways that pastoralists use to predict the onset of climate-induced risks or crises. The first one is risk, which we can tie that to the weather apps. It suggests that it's going to rain and it gives indicative or definitive number that 300 ml is going to rain. The second one is uncertainty because of the high variability in the drylands. You know the outcome, there's going to be rain or there's going to be drought. You don't know how it's going to unfold. The fourth one is unknowability. And a majority of us who have worked with pastoralists, we often get the sense of the answer that God knows. So we don't know how it's going to evolve or how it's going to, the outcome, we don't know how the outcome is going to be. And that is the third on unknowability. And the fourth one is ambiguity, whereby crises are given different interpretation. Some perceive drought as all as a cause of God. Some see drought as curse. Some see drought as, anomaly in average rainfall. So what does this has in terms of the anticipatory action particularly? And this slide looks more like a workshop copycat because the likes of Alex from Spark spoke broadly about how pastoralists do that, Derbyshire, Tahira. But the first thing that I want you to take home is that you need to avoid the binary of the knowledge at the local level. Pastoralists themselves don't have binary. They see knowledge, the more knowledge you have, the better decision you can make. And there is no valorization of knowledge. The second one is like we need to have flexible. And we have heard about flexibility even in majority of the works that have been shared. So we need to plan in accordance of the shifting landscape of the drylands. And the third one is the drylands don't suffer from climate shocks alone. Institutional policy, incongruency, and political shift. So we need to fortify the existing social networks, reciprocity norms, and customary institutions that already supporting the persons in the region. And then I'd like to combine the fourth one and the fifth one, which is looking at strengthening the governance, which is going to address the issues of marginalization and be able to allow persons to negotiate on how to pivot and how to move when shocks fluctuate from one to another. So that is my brief presentation, but if you want to learn more about the intestines, I have a poster out there, and you're welcome. And just to remind you again, I am George, and the intestine researcher. Thank you.
Thank you so much, George. So indeed, knowledge is not binary. That's my big takeaway. The flexibility, I think your presentation has made me realize how communities are actually very smart than us. They are not just like looking at one narrow. The assumption has been that it's about indigenous knowledge system versus science. Yet they recognize that the more they diverse information and source of information, the better. So thank you so much for that. We'll move on to the next speaker in the interest of time, and I want to invite on the podium Ginny and Nilsson, who is with ADRA. She's also going to be sharing another body of work that they've done in the communities that highlights how we can explore how to better engage communities and advance more locally led initiatives. Thank you. Right.
All right, looks like it's working. Good afternoon, everyone. As Nelly introduced me, my name is Janni Nilsson, and I work with ADRA Denmark as the climate program coordinator. I'm here today to do a presentation of how ADRA Denmark is supporting locally led anticipatory action at community level to enhance climate resilience, and also to illustrate how we as an organization are moving from research to action. So how are we using all of this knowledge that are out there on locally led anticipatory action on the ground with the communities? So earlier this year, ADRA Denmark led a research funded by Jameel Observatory in collaboration with CIFA Ethiopia, who's also here today, and University College of Denmark. And in this research, we focused on how to strengthen community-driven early warning and anticipatory action amongst the pastoralist communities in Borana zone in Ethiopia. I won't go too much into details on the methodologies of this, but I just want to highlight the participatory aspect of this piece of research. Because what this participatory element allows us was to ensure that the recommendations that were developed based on this research were really based on communities' perspectives, their perspectives of what the challenges they see in existing early warning systems, as well as what they see as the opportunities, the way that they describe how do we solve these challenges. The outcome of this research was a set of recommendations that ADRA Denmark is currently utilizing to inform existing programs. More broadly, but also quite specifically for a project that we are implementing in Somali region of Ethiopia, as well as Borana Zone and borderlines to Kenya. And this project is focusing on how we strengthen climate resilience livelihoods, adaptations, and preparedness towards climate extremes, but also conflict and displacement. I will give an example of how we are putting these recommendations into specific actions in a little bit. First, I'll give a very quick snapshot of some of the key findings from this research. So based on this research, we are seeing that for anticipatory action to strengthen ownership and local resilience, it needs to be embedded within existing community structures. In addition to that, and I'm a bit afraid to speak to this exact point, we need to at least recognize traditional knowledge as a way to predict weather events, but utilizing that in combination with modern forecasting as well, because we found that builds trust and effectiveness. I think our research still showed a gap on how to do that in practice, and I'm glad that Georges is working on breaking that down. I'll be looking forward to see the final results of that. In addition to that, we found that timely anticipatory action within the local communities requires pre-arranged and flexible financing, as well as clear coordination structures and roles of responsibilities within the communities. Then we also found that early warning systems should take a multi-hazard approach. Communities don't just face one issue, they face a range of issues that needs to be taken into consideration when they develop plans. Then we need to co-develop it with the communities. I think that's very evident from all of the speakers today as well. Then the early warning systems also needs to be flexible enough for it to allow adaptation to the changing livelihoods and to the changing hazards and risks that communities are facing. So how do we do this? How do we take these recommendations and build it into actions? When we look at some of the recommendations that came out of this research, one of the recommendations that I've also heard from other speakers is to utilize existing community structures. But what does that mean in practice? What is that? There are many community structures. One element is local authorities and strengthening the systems that they are trying to enforce. Another aspect that ADRA is working hard on is through community action planning, and this is not a concept that ADRA has developed. It also goes by other names, but this is an approach that ADRA is applying in many countries, and essentially it's a very participatory approach where communities are the ones that are leading their development. It is utilizing existing or naturally emerged groups of people within the communities that we work in. And what these groups are then doing in this approach is that they are the ones that are defining and identifying the challenges that the communities are facing. And they are the ones that design and lead the solutions. Very, very independent. What we're doing is only supporting a process and structure of it. In addition to that, in some circumstances, communities themselves are also contributing to projects by co-financing. So this is an approach that ADRA is using. I would like to present a little bit show a case of how ADRA Ethiopia is leading this, and how this CAP, as we call it, can serve as an enabler for a locally led anticipatory action. So in this case, ADRA Ethiopia has been mobilized and trained communities to enable them to identify the risks in their communities and plan for how to mitigate these risks. And in this specific case, this group of people in this community had identified a risk for an upcoming drought based on local drought indicators. That was followed by an investigation into these triggers, and confirmed that there were this risk of drought. The communities then identified a need for action, and one of the action that they identified was the need to harvest water to ensure access to water when the drought would be coming. And what the community identified as an opportunity to do this was through a rehabilitation of an underground cistern. These bihad, I think it's called. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. So this one, the Burkhead was restored, led by the community, and how the CAP served as a supportive environment for this was that the communities themselves financially supported this project, and they contributed with labor and materials. ADRA only added additional costs to enable this project. And what this meant was that the communities had sustained access to water, and even if the drought won't come, this will still be a remaining asset that is owned by this community. I know I'm running a little bit short on time, so I'll be quick on this other example. Another research recommendation that came out was a need for diversified livelihoods, which I think one of the speakers this morning also mentioned as being critical. This is just another example of how a group of women also identified this need in their communities, and came up with a solution which included them co-financing a solar-powered fridge, which led to a small-scale community business where women are charging phones, selling cool drinks. Again, this was co-financed by the community with only additional support from ADRA. So when we look at this CAP approach and why this is critical, or why we think it's an impactful approach for localizing anticipatory action, what we see is that especially this cost-sharing component of CAP is creating a very strong foundation for sustainable climate resilience. It's strengthening local ownership and local leadership, because people in the community have contributed financially to this. There's a sense of ownership in this. And I think this is really critical also to the mind shift changing within the communities, because this approach is really enabling the communities to take agency and to be the one taking decisions of what is needed in that specific community. In addition to that, it also serves as a platform to bring people together from different marginalized groups, which is also fostering social coherence and a platform for conflict resolution. These examples were very concrete solutions were developed, but CAP can also be used as a process or an advocacy tool where communities can identify areas or a list of problems that can then be taken to local communities. So it can also be a platform for that. So yeah, this was just an example of how we in ADRA are trying to take research and information into action, and how we are fostering or supporting projects that are fostering localized anticipatory action on a very localized level. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that presentation from ADRA. My takeaway there, community action planning. We like to run away from semantics in the sector. I am sure it would fit into what other agencies might call anticipatory action planning, others might say anticipatory action protocols, others might say any action protocols at community level. What I take away is that engaging communities into planning and into how they will deal with the potential crisis. I liked your mention on the contributions that communities can make in terms of resource injections through various initiatives, income generations. We see across Africa, in some communities, they get genius, they go into ecotourism on the same crisis. So thank you so much for highlighting how communities themselves can actually contribute in terms of financing the solutions. I think this is such a good time to invite on the podium Dr. Tahira Muhammad, who is touching on another subject in terms of the role of local and informal networks and social economies. So I think building on what Adra has presented, let's hear more of her board work on how the local or informal networks and social economies can actually contribute. Thank you, Dr.
Yeah, so for me, I've done quite a lot on local solidarity, moral economies, but my question is, how can this be linked to social policies? And for this presentation, I want to talk about first social protection and where Africa is, and what can we learn from the moral economy or the social network and solidarities. So number one, many of you are aware the World Bank's goal of reaching 500 million people with social protection by 2030. And then in Africa, social protection coverage is low, that is 17%, was the 47% globally. And thirdly, pastoralists are often sidelined in social policies, especially in social protection, cash transfers. Many a time, the cash transfers that goes to pastoral area or dryland areas is often in terms of risk, it's not right, it's risk-based, vulnerability-based kind of assistance. Despite this social part of policies, there is local safety nets, solidarities, and mutual aid that has been helping the communities live with different forms of uncertainties. And I argue we can learn some lesson from this social network and solidarities to inform social protection and social policies. So maybe some of you are wondering, this is a new space, so what is social protection or what is the mutual aid? From this publication, I can briefly say it is an action in response to levels of vulnerability, risk, and deprivation, which are deemed socially unacceptable within a given polity. But then the social component of it is a set of traditional and created networks of relation that enhances collective solidarity to respond to different crises. So what are the examples of social protection in East Africa? And here I want to talk about the right side of the slide, which is the dryland focused social protection. And I will be biased because my work has been in Kenya. So we have like emergency cash transfers and livestock offset. And then one specifically called Hunger Safety Net Program, which is cash transfer for most vulnerable counties, mostly pastoral area. And then there's also the index-based livestock insurance. So these are some of the examples of the social protection program in the drylands. The one on the other side is the national program, which I will not talk about. So I want to talk about one component of this social protection, and it is how complex it is, especially in targeting, because you have to start from geographical targeting to know where this program is going to be taken, identifying the vulnerable communities within that geographies, and then registering them, and then identifying the selected household. It's so much process-oriented. So by the time geographies is decided, who decides? For example, whether it will go to Baringo or Isiolo County, it's such a bureaucratic process. So that is one thing I want you to know. And then now let's talk to the mutual aid or social aid, solidarity or redistribution in the context of East African drylands. Through my research, I understood so many components of it, but then I want to talk about it in two aspects. One is the normative aspect of it, which is mostly rooted in people's norms, values, cultures, religion, and it starts from life cycles. For example, among the Borana communities, people are given animal when they are born immediately. So you have your herd. If you are lucky enough, they survive, and you are maybe 20 years, you'll have so many herds. And if you are not lucky enough and you lose the drought or flood, then you will get many other means of accumulating herd. But the redistribution starts during life cycles. And then another form of assistance is comradeship and social capital. Because in the dryland, we've been talking about the variabilities, you need to invest in different relationships. So you have to store your herd in different locations so that when there is flood here, the one in the northern part of the region will survive. And those are like comradeship and relationships. So you have to have friends, families in different parts so that you can leave your herds or your resources with them. And then on the other side is the institution. Many a time we think that pastoralists or even dryland communities are antithesis toward institutions like politics, economies, markets. We see there's so much into their traditional practices. But these communities are very much adaptive. They learn from the institution and see how they can productively use the institution. And for example, in Kenya, we have what is called Harambe. Harambe is pooling resources. It's originally it's originated from the political philosophy of pooling resources, to make people contribute toward public goods. So the pastoralist communities are so much using this Harambe, mostly to educate their children, to even like many of the pastoralist people who have gone to school have been supported through this Harambe. So it's different forms of fundraising. So it's not giving livestock, but giving money for health and different systems of support. And then there's also diversification. How is diversification mutual aid? Because for you to diversify, you have to have someone you can work with, like a partner you trust, so who can give you loan. And these forms of assistance help people do business. And then another one is through religion, and as you know, for example, zakat, a certain percentage of your wealth that you have to give to the people who are categorized as the recipient. So this is the summary of the social mutual aid that exists. So initially I was talking about how targeting is complex, but then how does mutual assistance help people respond to crisis? Here I have two quotes. Number one is responding to raid. Is there any social assistance program that supports people who have been raided? Are you aware, for example, or social protection that supports like people affected by conflict, unless maybe it's specifically cash transfer for food, for nutrition, for such an activities. So in pastoral area, you are prone to any crisis, raid, flood, and you have to ensure yourself against this crisis. For example, this person is telling us there was a raid or livestock raid in 2017, and he said, I gave out 7 cattle, 6 cows, and 1 bull to people who are not of my blood relation. I also gave several small stock. I gave out because of Borantiti. Borantiti means the ideals of being Borana, like the ideals of being someone, the identities that you identify yourself with. So he also goes ahead and say, I visited each family and gave my sympathy and told them to come for livestock in my enclosure. Although you cannot give to everyone, you try to reach out. And then on the other side is drought. And this one I want to emphasize on it because many a times we think local action is like, like taking your animal to different places, but responding to drought is multiple activities. For example, you are protecting your animal from drought, but then there's wild animal, who are also hungry and they want your animal. So you have people who have to provide defensive services. So they'll guard at night to protect the animal. And then also we have people who need to invest in labor so that they can dig wells so that the animals will have water. But also you need to pool resources to purchase feeds and fodder from maybe neighboring counties, maybe in our case in the highland counties. So this kind of pooling resources, comradeship, relationship is what makes local efforts to respond to drought. This is my second last slide. So I always love to compare things in a table so that I can see like where is the disconnect or where is the relationship. And here I want to talk about 3 things. Number one, it's mode of delivering. Social protection is often delivered top down, as you know, like you have to geographically target and all the processes that I mentioned. But then this one, it has pathway diversity. So you have your neighbor who can help you, your family who can help you, your business partner who can help you. And then second thing is about trust and accountability. In many a time, social policies has this vertical upward accountability, but this one is so much towards horizontal provision of care, and it's so much embedded in social relationship. And then finally, I don't want to talk about all of this, is the coverage. Social protection, as I was talking about earlier, or even livestock insurance, looks at a particular event. So if it is drought, then it's going to cover you for drought. For example, livestock insurance. What if drought fail, but you lose your animal to raiding or to flood? Are they going to shift that money to cover you? But then, the opposite way, this collective solidarity covers everything. So if you lose your livestock, then their communities are ready to restock you. So those are the three differences. So what are my takeaways? 5 points, 4 points here. Number one, social policies and provision in the dryland need to be focusing on protective aspect of it. Because many times it is about response and cash, emergency cash transfers. During the 2022 drought in the Horn of Africa, there were so many cash transfers, emergency cash transfers. What happened for recovery? Because sometimes it is difficult for these people to go back to their previous state. You lost 70 cows, then like for you to recover will take time because other droughts come in. And then second thing is about flexibility. How is our social policies and programs flexible to move, as I mentioned earlier? For example, is it possible for the drought insurance money to give feed when feed is in deficit, or to support labor because I need labor to move my animal from Ethiopian border to Kenya? Sometimes it involves even hiring a lorry. Who pays for that cost? Is the social policy flexible enough to support this dynamic and diverse needs? And then thirdly, is the relationship between the complex social protection systems. For example, the climate change adaptation, humanitarian actors, all of them have different forms of social assistance and they operate in the dryland. How are they flexible to harmonize their relationship and be able to change their operation so that at least they can build on what one has achieved? And then thirdly, another important is this state capacity relationship. In the beginning of my presentation, I was talking about social policy as a right, and in pastoral area, mostly social protection as like respond to risk. Many a time it is responding to risk because it's vulnerability and it's so much driven in humanitarian causes. So for the dryland, is it possible to shift from this risk-oriented provisioning to right-oriented provisioning, because these people like also are like normal, like other citizens? And finally, what I think is important for research to consider is invest in knowledge brokers to translate this, because we've been talking about local knowledge, local solidarity, local things. What does this mean for our government, for the policymakers? I think we need knowledge brokers to invest in them so that this language can be translated to what they understand. And finally, one thing that we need to consider is beyond, romanticizing these things, like, okay, we see pastoralists as resilient, as prosperous, as adaptive. How can this conversation influence? So we need dialogue, and dialogue with people who make decisions. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much. I think you end by saying we need dialogue with those who make decisions. My big takeaway is that let's not just jump into the communities and bring in all these very well-structured social protection initiative or whatever we call them. Let's recognize what already pre-exists as local networks, as local social networks, and perhaps integrate our initiatives with those. Then only then can we have a more sustainable approach to supporting these communities. Thank you very much. You also then touched on the role of the government in all that, how to ensure that even as we go on the ground, that the local structures that help with the overall coordination also enforce some of these broader thinking that integrates communities on setup. I think at this point, we'll jump on to the last presenter before we go on to discussions and getting the room's input. So I will invite on the podium Dr. Miki Nassef, who is with SPAC, and she will talk about the local government-led anticipatory actions in Uganda and Mali. in Uganda and Mali. So welcome to the podium. Thank you.
Yes. So just press. Thank you very much, Nelly, and greetings, everyone. And just for the record, I am not a doctor, but thank you anyway. So my name is Magda Nassif, and I'll be sharing some of the findings from recent work that Spark has done in Mali, in the Mopti region in Mali, and in the Karamoja region of Uganda, where we explored local government-led anticipatory action. The work was done under ODI Global, and it was done together with multiple colleagues, two of whom we're lucky to have in the room with us today. Simon Levine, sitting all the way in the back, and Rafael Lotira, who led the work in Uganda. So in both countries, we spoke with local government staff across multiple departments, water departments, agriculture, animal production, animal health, etc., to try to find out whether they do any kind of anticipatory action, and if so, what this looks like, and to find out some of the challenges they face as well. In turn, they told us about the actions they took ahead of locust invasions, floods, droughts, and human and livestock diseases. We did the work mainly to raise the profile of local government within existing conversations on anticipatory action, as they are very much underrepresented. So, what did we find? We found that local authorities in both countries did quite a bit of anticipatory action, but they don't call it that. In fact, they don't call it anything in particular. They considered it a very normal part of their work, and many were surprised that these types of activities even had a name. We also found that local authorities have a comparative advantage, very much worth leveraging. However, they require engagement on their terms, not on ours. So what kinds of anticipatory actions did local authorities take? It turns out that they did a wide range of things. They shared warnings and advice with the public. Often they knew the effective ways of getting information to people, being themselves from the community. So in Mali, for example, the griots were mobilized, who are traditional storytellers and news bearers that exist in all villages and are an age-old mechanism of getting information to people. Local authority staff knew about the griot because to them this was obvious. They're from there. In Uganda, things were similar. Local authorities got information out through religious and community leaders, through local markets, and through traditional local meetings. All platforms that are easier to know about and to access when you're from a place. They assigned existing staff to focus on the new threat. In the case of locusts in Uganda, for example, there was no local government budget to act, but what they could do is pull staff from their regular work and task them with getting information out to people about locusts, and also to collect information back from people. So for example, the locations of locusts to guide aerial spraying. They ramped up surveillance and monitoring. For example, when an alert came of a suspected case of anthrax in Uganda, local authorities mobilized their community animal health workers, who are volunteers embedded within local authority structures, to ramp up surveillance and monitoring. And this helped nip anthrax in the bud in that district. They prioritized infrastructure for maintenance and repairs. For example, in Mali, ahead of floods, They mobilized youth volunteers and people in all the villages with whom they have long-standing relationships to maintain and repair the main dikes. While in Uganda, when floods were forecast, 2 departments came together and revisited an existing plan to fortify local roads against floods. From this plan, they prioritized 4 out of 10 roads for immediate action, effectively transforming a plan for disaster risk reduction into anticipatory action. They pre-positioned supplies. So ahead of drought in Mali, pastoralists requested fodder from local governments, who managed to get these supplies back to pastoralists from central governments in time for the expected hunger season. So these are just some examples of local authorities seeing ahead and acting early. Many of these actions took place in spite of significant challenges. For example, most of the local authorities we spoke to were cash-strapped, with no discretionary funds for anticipatory action. And yet they managed to act anyway, sometimes paying out of pocket, sometimes stretching existing internal funds, and often through just mobilizing local people, volunteers, and NGOs. They were also creative. For example, in Uganda, they piggybacked on a funded anthrax vaccination campaign to also deliver foot and mouth disease vaccinations. Or they folded locust surveillance into pre-planned surveillance for other crop pests and diseases. So, while anticipatory action in the humanitarian sphere often takes the form of assistance projects with dedicated funds, local authorities are clearly not limited to this. They work naturally and seamlessly across several categories of early action, which shows that thinking and acting ahead are already embedded in how they work. Finally, local authorities also regularly combined formal warnings and forecasts with informal warnings to prompt early action, which we heard in previous presentations as well. For example, in Uganda, they observed unusual bird migrations, which to them meant likely floods, and combined this with the formal forecasts they received, which are often broad and not contextualized, to prompt action. So, moving forward, local authorities can play a role in anticipatory action that no one else can, especially when their staff are from the communities they serve. They're both institutions of the state and also of local communities, and their staff often know local realities well. They also have networks on the ground that are hard to match, and they've also been around long enough to build trust, which is very hard to manufacture when time is critical. We should find out what they're already doing, since their actions may be invisible, as they're not labeled as anything, and also may not look like what we imagine anticipatory action should look like. We should avoid introducing predefined processes and jargon, which could limit the horizon when working with local authorities. Rather, we should take their own ways of working as a starting point and build on this. And this requires genuine partnership and co-creation. We should also overcome our hesitation to embrace informality, which we heard in several other presentations, as this runs through all aspects of how local authorities work, and alternatively recognize that informality offers opportunities for quicker and more effective anticipatory action, which could otherwise be missed. We should recognize that appropriate anticipatory action at the local level requires locally appropriate triggers, rather than centralized triggers, which can't work for shocks in different places and for different livelihood groups. Local authorities are likely to have a good understanding of these locally appropriate triggers. And finally, we should be mindful that approaches are likely to be very, very different, even in neighboring districts or local governments, given different politics, different geographies, and local capacities. So we mustn't generalize or impose a one-size-fits-all. In conclusion, local authorities are an underappreciated resource, engaging them on their terms, recognizing their expertise, and supporting them to act early would locally root anticipatory action and is part and parcel of achieving stronger community-led early action. And I'm going to add a caveat to this, so that while this may not apply across the board and in every country, we should look beyond assumptions about local authorities and not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. So the role of local authorities, I think that's undisputed. We do recognize the role in most of these places that we're working. They are not failed states. There is a structure there from national to local level. How do we reinforce to work with that system? How do we recognize what they already have in place? How do we build on it as opposed to looking at replacing it or acting like this is new? It hasn't existed. So thank you so much. So thank you very much, everyone who participated in terms of bringing the board of work you've been doing. And thank you also for your reflection after the presentations. I just have a few takeaways on my side. I think what I'm taking out of this is that, number one, I think the angle of appreciating that communities are already doing AA, and that we don't even have to say co-creation, but let's actually get there, listen to them, and bring in that which we want to bring. We can call it co-creation, but I think they've already created it. Let's just work with them. Let's engage them. Let's see how to integrate with their knowledge, their resources that already exist. And number two, the role of the communities themselves, the local system. You call them local authorities, you call them, or I want to call it a local ecosystem. How do we work with the entire ecosystem, be they government, local authorities, religious authorities? How do we work with these communities as an ecosystem so that we really embed what we do in what they already know as an ecosystem, as the end user? Number three, the role of the local, the informal systems. We had what they contribute. How do we work with those systems? I think following the funding cuts at the beginning of this year, we have all started to talk around the role of the other actors that haven't been in the mainstream, humanitarian and development sector. So this informal system can also play a role. Let's see how to harness these informal, local informal systems and their contributions. That way we can have a more holistic approach to addressing the needs of the community, not just being external looking. Around 2022, the UN Secretary General made very ambitious targets, talking about every person on earth having access to early warning systems. My question is that where are we for the pastoralists and for the dryland communities? So George there, the intestines mind, I think you are bringing a very important subject. Where are the pastoralists and the dryland communities? Are they being reached with early warning information systems, or should we recognize all these other systems as well? Like you said, that communities don't think in a binary way. How do we make use of also the indigenous systems, integrate that? That way we perhaps will be moving forward towards ensuring that every person on earth will have access to early warning information. If we look at one system, then the gaps are obvious. Those targets might not be reached by 2027. I wanted to just maybe close by saying that AA is actually not new at all to communities. I have sat in many forums where we're discussing AA. We want to talk about who actually discovered AA. It's been there for ages. I was actually born in communities where I saw AA really being implemented very effectively with very limited to no mortality, with communities thriving. Some of those communities today, we support them, we use scientific data, and that system is still working, so it is not new. So I guess I want to conclude by saying, what will it take for us to ensure that early warning systems and AA in pastoral and dryland communities is truly locally led and builds on resilient communities? For me, I think it will take the discussions, the rich discussions, the different bodies of work that are feeding, but also above all, our own commitments. I think someone just summed up that we already know what we need to do, but that political will to do it, to really go back to the communities, to appreciate that what we need is a locally led system. That's the only system that's sustainable and can genuinely support communities. Thank you.